I'm John Heilemann.
And I'm Mark Halprin. With all due respect to Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, you guys want to take this thing outside. In our playlist tonight, the one with the dentist, the one with the bridge, and the one with John Meacham. But first, the one with the pretty interesting immigration debate. On our radar, we've been watching for a while now, Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz getting closer and closer to a head-on collision. And today, we got a glimpse of what that explosion might ultimately look like. After throwing some of that amnesty shade at Rubio in Tuesday's debate, Cruz went on the radio today and amped it up.
We had an epic battle in Congress just a couple of years ago. We're not talking about 10, 20 years ago. We're talking just a couple of years ago on the question of amnesty. And the argument that we need to secure the border first was an argument I was making over and over again. It was an argument you were making over and over again. It was an argument Jeff Sessions was making over and over again. And all the folks on the other side dismissed it, saying we were wrong-headed and anti-immigrant for believing we should actually secure the borders. I have a deep and genuine disagreement with that view. And so, I got to say, as a voter, when politicians think the exact opposite of what they've done in office, I treat that with a pretty healthy degree of skepticism.
So Cruz hits Rubio pretty clearly on the question of amnesty and so-called amnesty and immigration. And it's Rubio's turn. At an event in South Carolina a few hours after Cruz was on the radio, he made the case that he and his rival were not so different on this issue of amnesty and immigration.
Ted is a supporter of legalizing people that are in this country illegally. In fact, when the Senate bill was proposed, he proposed legalizing people that were here illegally. He proposed giving them work permits. He's also supported a massive expansion of the green cards. He supported a massive expansion of the H-1B program, a 500% increase. So if you look at it, I don't think our positions are dramatically different.
So despite what Rubio said there is some differences. We'll talk about those in a second. But Rubio made news on immigration in another way today. He went on Fox News and he made it clear that some people who are in the country illegally now will have to be deported before there can be a talk of additional immigration reform. So, John, in this fight over immigration and more broadly, if we head towards a Cruz-Rubio showdown, who has the upper hand?
Well, at this moment, I think Ted Cruz has the upper hand. His position is clearer, easier to explain, and more consistent with what we think we know about these two guys. Ted Cruz was not a member of the Gang of Eight. Marco Rubio was a member of the Gang of Eight. And there's going to be, we'll discuss all the intricacies of amendments and all the various stuff that Rubio is counterclaiming here. But in the end, Ted Cruz is the restrictionist, and Marco Rubio is the one with a muddled position.
And the things that Ted Cruz proposed are nothing like a path to legal status that was in the Gang of Eight immigration bill.
Or citizenship or anything else.
Or citizenship, which is what I should have said. The other thing is, this is now at least the second time that Rubio has staked out a position on immigration that moves him even farther to the right.
Yes.
And it is going to be harder and harder for him to avoid lots of criticism. And if he becomes a nominee, additional criticism, staking out these positions in an ad hoc way, and that it works to Cruz's benefit.
Right. Well, we talked about this yesterday on the show. I just think muddle is a bad place to be because you really end up pleasing no one. Rubio's in the difficult position right now where it's likely that he will never convince restrictionists in the party that he's with them because of his history. And every time he tries, he makes his prospects in the general election worse by putting himself in a more conservative place.
And I don't think talk radio and the grassroots are going to buy Rubio's position that he and Cruz are equivalent.
Not at all, because they're not.
Yeah.
All right. We've also been talking a lot on this show of late about the role of opposition research and investigative reporting and how those things are going to play out in the course of the next few months as we head toward the voting in the Republican and Democratic nomination fights. On the Republican side today, once again, in this venue, in this realm, the target is Dr. Ben Carson. The AP today writes about Carson's connection to a Pittsburgh dentist named Alfonso Costa, who pleaded guilty in 2008 to charging patients for procedures he didn't perform. He was a dentist doing oral surgery, allegedly. Apparently, he didn't do some of those surgeries and then charged people for it. Now, Carson has close business and personal ties to Costa. Costa served on the board of Carson's charity. Carson wrote a letter to the court during Costa's fraud trial asking for leniency. But just a couple of years later, Carson wrote in one of his books that anyone found guilty of healthcare fraud should face no fewer than 10 years in prison. Costa avoided prison time with the help of Dr. Carson and served just 1 year of house arrest. In a statement to Bloomberg Politics today, Carson said, quote, "I know his heart," referring to Costa. "I am proud to call him my friend. I have always and will continue to stand by him. That is what real friends do," end quote. So, Mark, Ben Carson, a new flap. How big a threat is this one to his candidacy?
This AP story basically has two elements. One, Carson's one of his best friends, maybe his best friend, is a guy who once committed a crime and admitted to it. Yep. I don't think that's going to be a problem. This other issue of apparent or maybe hypocrisy, saying specifically in a book, anyone who commits medical fraud should go to prison for a long time or face other severe penalties. He didn't think that was true in the case of his friend. We don't have a clear answer from the Carson campaign on that one. I also don't think that will be a big deal, even worst case. I don't think his core supporters will matter. It is another brick in the wall, though, of Carson's long-term problem dealing with controversies from his past.
Let's see, as people start to dig in, what we understand is that Carson, because of his association with Costa, who also made millions as a real estate developer, commercial real estate, that he profited, made a lot of money off those deals. Nothing wrong so far has been alleged there, but you know that's the next phase.
But Carson wasn't in public office.
But if you are profiting from your association with a guy who is a convicted felon, there are some things that people are going to be looking into. All I'm saying is he's becoming a riper and riper target for investigation.
This story will get people moving.
That's all I'm saying.
Not a problem so far in and of itself. All right, time for a classic shot and chaser. The shot, Ben Carson said in the Republican debate in Milwaukee this week that China had some sort of military presence in Syria. Here's Carson advisor Armstrong Williams today on MSNBC defending that stance.
Dr. Carson said that the Chinese are in Syria, which is not accurate.
Well, Tamara, from your perspective and what most people know, maybe that is inaccurate. But from our intelligence and what Dr. Carson's been told by people who are on the ground, who's involved in that region of the world, it has been told to him many times over and over that the Chinese are there. Now, just because the mainstream media and other experts don't want to seem to give credibility to it, does not mean that some way down the line, over the next few days, that story will come out and it will be reinforced and given credibility by others.
All right, so now the chaser, or at least the Democratic counterpoint, courtesy of White House National Security Advisor Susan Rice, who said today she doesn't have a clue what Carson or his camp is talking about. Also, on the foreign policy front with Carson, he did an interview with Iowa Radio on Wednesday, and here's what he said about what he'd do as president if Russian planes violated a U.S. no-fly zone over Syria.
If we declare this no-fly zone and Russian MiGs are in the air, we're going to need, I guess if they won't back down when challenged, do we shoot down a Russian MiG?
Well, the Russian MiGs aren't flying in that area. They're flying over Iraq.
Well, I understand. Well, they're flying over Syria as well, but I understand that. But what if they go there?
If they do come into that area, after you have given them adequate warning, after we've talked to Putin, you shoot them down, absolutely.
All right, there is the whole butterfly effect. If you shoot down a Russian MiG, what happens next? They will respond, no question.
Whatever happens next, we deal with it, but we can't continue backing down.
All right, so this isn't the first time Carson has said controversial things on foreign policy. He said them to us on this show. The first thing, most foreign policy experts, including Susan Rice, don't agree with him. His camp says maybe stuff's going to come out that'll show China's in Syria. The second thing, I'm not sure most people in the Republican Party would mind that position. Is this a problem?
Yeah, the first thing is a problem on two different levels. It's not a question of a Democratic counterpoint. The National Security Advisor is coming out and saying what everybody believes, that the Chinese are not, in fact, in Syria.
Right, but if he's wrong about that, so politically, so what politically?
It makes him sound like an amateur. It makes him sound like Herman Cain, who's Becky, Stan, and now he's got an advisor on the air on television claiming that they have better intelligence than the White House. Effectively.
Who's that going to hurt him with?
Well, it's going to hurt him with anybody who might seriously ever give any thought to whether the person should be president of the United States.
He said so many things about foreign policy that are just as unsupportable.
If you're trying to tell me you think that this is yet another reason why this man does not have a leg to stand on in terms of his policy expertise in terms of foreign policy, I agree with you about that, and it just makes it worse. It's rather vivid.
I was actually throwing up some straw man. In fact, I think this is where the phases matter. If he'd said these things before, no one would have cared. He's at a period now as a front runner and getting close to Iowa where this stuff, I think, more than any of the other flaps
we agree.
We do.
Good,
this stuff now could hurt him. Didn't hurt him before, now it could.
Because it's getting to the point where voters are really going to start to focus, and that matters.
Yep.
Okay. I like it when we agree. As Christie has been on a kind of a good run lately, it seemed to many people like he might have finally put the shadow of Bridgegate behind him. But now, like a bad Hollywood reboot, Bridgegate is back with a weird subplot. Lawyers are trying to get their hands on thousands of documents and emails from Christie's office. In a court filing yesterday, they also claim that David Wildstein, Christie's high school classmate and former Port Authority appointee, who pleaded guilty to bridge-related felony corruption charges, stole a hard drive that was under subpoena from the Port Authority offices in 2013. Mark, so this is a two-part question. Is Bridgegate back? And if it's back in this form that we're now dealing with it, how big a problem is that for Christie?
It's back as a low-grade issue, but Bridgegate was never Christie's main problem with Republican voters. It was too close to President Obama after Superstorm Sandy, and what was he selling from his New Jersey record given New Jersey's economic problems? Unless Bridgegate gets directly to him in some way that showed he lied, I don't think Bridgegate is his problem, and the fact that it's back in the headlines on some low-grade level I don't think matters.
I think I disagree with you about this. Look, I think Bridgegate has been a problem for Christie just in general. It consumed a huge amount of his time, a huge amount of his focus at the period of time when he was the de facto, maybe Republican frontrunner. It made him into
that guy's got a lot of bandwidth.
It made him into a national laughingstock, the butt of jokes throughout the country. It cannot be good for Chris Christie to have people reminded in any way of the closing of the traffic, of the bridge traffic, and all of the kind of chaos that ensued there. Not good for him. I don't think it necessarily derails his alleged comeback, but it's not great.
The super PAC supporting him was going on the air with radio ads in Iowa. Once again, I'm telling you, Christie thinks he can steal Iowa as a matter of perception in the expectations game and get into New Hampshire.
Wow.
He is playing a smart, savvy game, levering all he's got.
What does Christie need to? What place does Christie need to finish in Iowa for anyone to consider him as having stolen it?
He needs to either be the first or second finisher in the establishment lane, and he needs to finish well above what everybody expects him to finish with, which is right now most people expect him to finish with nada.
Okay. All right. Up next, we will run through the likeliest scenarios for that great political journalistic fantasia, a contested Republican convention next summer. And Jeb Bush super supporter Vin Weber will be here with us. We'll be back in exactly 60 seconds. For a while now, the political world has been wondering if the volatile and crowded Republican nomination contest was headed toward that Super Bowl of political nerddom, the thing that people always predict might happen but never does, a contested national convention. It has been fun to think about in the abstract, as always, but with the primaries and caucuses quickly approaching and all the frontrunners displaying some vulnerabilities, it's now more likely than ever to actually happen. Or so writes Danielle Hettinger in the Wall Street Journal today, noting that none of the Republican candidates look likely to pull away from the pack and secure the requisite number of delegates to secure the party's mantle before the nominating convention in Cleveland next summer. Mark, it's one thing to talk about this in the abstract. We always, everybody in our business, fantasizes about it every cycle. What are the actual plausible, realistic scenarios by which we end up there this time?
So the five guys up on our giant wall right now, Cruz, Trump, Carson, Rubio, and Bush. Those five are the most likely to be able to continue past the first four states almost no matter what. All five of them could say, no matter how I've performed in the first four, I want to go forward because I've got the money and I've got the opportunities down the road, and I think the other people are weak. Kasich and Christie, I think, have to perform well in the first four states or they can't go on. But if four of the five feel they can go on into March, then I think mathematically We may almost invariably have a brokered convention as long as people don't give up. And I think these 5 are not going to be inclined to give up.
So to me, the scenario is basically a very simple scenario. It's either Donald Trump runs the table in the early contest. He wins Iowa and wins New Hampshire, wins South Carolina, or Ben Carson does the same thing, and they go on a tear in the first few contests, driving a bunch of people out of the race. And then when you start to get to these multi-primary states, there's a consolidation that happens on the establishment side, whether that's around Bush or Rubio in the likeliest scenarios. And they've accumulated so many delegates. The Carson or Trump guy has gotten enough delegates that you can't keep him out of the convention, but then the establishment coalesces in the later states, and they get enough that you end up in a brokered scenario.
The reason I don't think that scenario is likely is if either Trump or Carson runs the table early, I don't think you can stop them. They'll keep winning Southern contests, and I don't think you can stop them. They'll win winner-take-alls like Florida, and I don't think you can stop them. I think if one guy runs the table, it's done.
It's all a matter of timing, though. Kind of like how quickly does the consolidation happen? Because once you get down to Donald Trump or Ben Carson versus one establishment candidate, we've never seen any sign that Donald Trump's a guy who can get 50%.
Here's why I think it's unlikely that'll happen. Because you're going to have at least 2 establishment people coming out of the first 2, say, who think they have a claim on going forward. I think at least 2, maybe 3. And if you're so weak that you couldn't beat Trump in Iowa or New Hampshire, I don't think the establishment's going to instantly say, well, the strongest of the weak guys who couldn't stop him, let's consolidate there. I just think people will say there's fundamental weakness in the people in this field. Maybe they'll think about Mitt Romney at that point.
Okay, so one way or the other, let's say through one of our scenarios, either your scenario, which is the chaos scenario, or my scenario, who has the upper hand in a contested convention, the establishment wing or the anti-establishment?
Normally it'd be the establishment. This time, I don't know. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk with a mega supporter of Jeb Bush, the one, the only, former congressman from Minnesota, and a wise man, Vin Weber, right after this. Joining us now here in studio, a backer of Jeb Bush, the former Minnesota congressman. We welcome him always on the program, Vin Weber. Vin, when you backed Jeb Bush, you thought he had a good chance to be the nominee. He's gone through a rough patch, although the debate buoyed him and his supporters a little bit.
I think it did.
What ails Jeb Bush now? What is the problem that's keeping him from being one of the clear front runners, and what's the solution?
Well, first of all, I supported Jeb Bush because I thought he would be the best president, best qualified person to put up against Hillary Clinton. I still think that's all true.
Right.
What's surprising about this race is that does not seem to matter.
Right.
And we've got 2 people leading the Republican race who have no experience in government and who don't match up well, in my judgment, against a highly experienced and credible candidate like Hillary Clinton. But the public...
So what ails him, and what's the solution for the nominee?
I think that the solution, let me say what it's not. It's not to start being something other than what he is. I liked him in the debate the other night, policy-oriented, defending his position on immigration, even though it may not be the most popular position in the party. I didn't particularly like last debate where he criticized Marco Rubio, which I don't think is in his character to be that kind of a candidate. You got to just move ahead, talk about policy, take Trump on who's the front runner, on some of the ridiculous things he says about policy. Maybe Carson, too, although Carson's a lot less definitive on policy. And hope that in the course of the campaign, that's what penetrates. I think people ultimately are going to want to choose a candidate who's qualified to be president and qualified to go up against Hillary Clinton.
Do you have a sense that, I mean, one of the things I think people have watched is he has performed not as well as many people thought he was going to perform, is a question of whether he really wants this or not. Does he yearn for the presidency? Does he feel like he will do whatever is necessary? Does he have that fire in the belly?
I think he really wants to be president. He did not have to do this. There was a time when people thought he wasn't going to do it. He launched early to make it very clear to everybody he wanted to do it. He's working very hard. Much of the campaign is going very, very well. We're raising a lot of money. He still is hanging in there in the polls. We've got this phenomenon of Trump and Carson that, you know, I watch you guys every morning try to explain to the country on Morning Joe. And we're trying to explain it, but we don't know it. What's really happened, in my view, was Trump got into the race and froze the race. He shot to the top for reasons we don't fully understand. We're still trying to explain it. But he froze the race for 3 or 4 months. I think the race is now unfreezing a little bit. We've seen it with Carson moving up. We've seen it with Rubio bouncing a little bit. And I think over the next few months it's going to melt even more, and other candidates are going to have a chance. But there's no question something happened in this race over the summer with Donald Trump that none of us anticipated, and we still can't quite explain.
Big talk this week about whether Jeb Bush and his allies can go negative on Marco Rubio, and some Bush donors even don't want that to happen. You know, no Bush has won the White House without doing negative campaigns against their rivals in the nomination fight. Is there some reason that Jeb Bush should be reluctant, not on personal attacks, but is there some reason why Jeb Bush and his allies should be reluctant to say, here's what's wrong with Marco Rubio and Jeb's better?
I think it's tougher to take on Marco Rubio, whether you're Jeb Bush or anybody else, because, first of all, you guys know, the polling shows that even though the Republican Party voters have preferences, they're not firm preferences. So they're thinking about 3 or 4 candidates, even if they say they are for one candidate or the other. Right. That means they don't necessarily want any of the candidates to be too badly roughed up, because that may be somebody they end up supporting. And in the case of Marco Rubio, you got a party that's had problems with Hispanics and problems with young voters, and he's a young, Hispanic, articulate leader. A lot of people in the party, including people that are not supporting him for president, don't want to see him damaged too badly. The party doesn't need to start alienating.
Jeb Bush doesn't have, and his allies, his super PAC, don't have the option?
I think they got to be very careful about it, and whether it's Bush or anybody else, I think you got to be very careful how you take on Marco Rubio. He's an attractive person to much of the party, even to people that aren't backing him.
Well, so that's fine. You got to be careful about it, and there's no doubt. I mean, it seems to me, if I'm running Marco Rubio's campaign, that element of Teflon that you're describing is a pretty incredible asset that he has. So if you got to be careful about it, how do you do it? Because you can't just let him skate. If you let him skate, he's going to go on and win the nomination.
Well, I know that. I think you can take him on at some point, but it's got to be very strictly on the issues, very strictly on and raise the question of, has his conduct on issues proven that he is ready to be president?
Is it issues or is it leadership? Is there issues you think their contrast is winning for Jeb Bush? Or is it just Jeb Bush says, I'm more experienced, I've tested, he's not?
I don't think that cuts enough. I think you have to...
What's the issue? What's an issue where Jeb Bush can say, here's Marco Rubio's position, here's mine, vote for me, I'm better?
Well, I'm not going to start defining it for Bush yet, but I think other candidates are going to do that as well as Governor Bush. But I think you've got to stick to the issues with him, because otherwise you're going to end up in a personal fight, and that's not what anybody wants.
But let me ask you this question directly, right? Marco Rubio's got this one position on abortion where he says he's against abortion, and even in cases of rape, incest, life of the mother. A lot of people think that's a very difficult position to hold in a general election. Is it okay for Republicans to prosecute that issue? Is that an argument that you can feel comfortable making, even though it might damage him in the general election?
I think you're right that position is damaging the general election. I think to take on a candidate in a Republican primary for being too pro-life is a strategy that is not likely to work.
Who's the nominee going to be?
I think Bush is still going to be the nominee. I would be dishonest if I said I'm shocked by the way that this campaign has developed. I thought Bush would be running away with it by now. I'm surprised. But I still think he is clearly the best qualified candidate. I like the way he performed in the debate the other night. I think he contrasts best with these
everybody in the party says, well, I'll support whoever the nominee is. You know, they're all better than Hillary Clinton. If Donald Trump is a nominee, will people like you say, you know what, that's a bridge too far. We're going to have to find another solution?
I think that we saw in the debate the other night some real fissures in the Republican Party unfolding. Somebody like Donald Trump, who says that he wants to deport 11 million people, wants to basically start a trade war with Mexico, and wants to seize the oil fields in the Middle East, causes me a lot of heartburn.
Okay, we'll follow up on that later. Vin, thanks very much. Up next, in education, about the education issue in this 2016 presidential election right after this.
The last Republican to live in the White House, that would be George W. Bush, made education a signature issue. So how important will it be in the 2016 presidential race? In interviews this week with our friend Campbell Brown, Ben Carson and Marco Rubio both talked about how they would tackle the education issue.
Define the problem around public education today as you see it.
Well, there's several. I mean, one of it, of course, is that it's not adequately preparing our children to succeed at the next level. You know, we have some of the finest higher education institutions in the world, by evidenced by the fact that the wealthiest and most powerful people on the planet send their kids to go to school here, but you have far too many young people that enter that not prepared to learn. So that's part of it. Part of it is parents have very few choices or opportunities to choose where their kids go to school. This is particularly true for low-income parents who are often trapped sending their kids to a failing school because the government doesn't let them choose where their children go to school. And then part of it is a mismatch between the skills and the knowledge required to succeed in the 21st century and what our schools are teaching. So there's several issues going on in the K-12 system that are of deep concern.
Well, it really kind of depends on your zip code, whether it's failing or not. Unfortunately, we consign a large number of our students who live in the wrong zip codes to failing schools. And a lot of those kids, they come from homes with no books. They go to a school with no library or poorly functioning library. Then they move up into this high school where things are not happening, and they drop out. And you see these enormous dropout rates in some of our major cities. This is a real scourge on our society, because we have to recognize that for every one of those kids that goes down that wrong pathway, you know, that's one more person you got to protect yourself and your family from, pay for in the penal system or the welfare system.
Do you want to be the education president?
Yeah, I do, but I think it's important. One of the best things that a president can do in order to move forward on K through 12 is not to involve the federal government in its details. Allow that to reside with the local school districts and at the local level, because it is at the states and local level where you're going to see the innovation necessary to improve. The one area where I do think we can be helpful is for students that want to go into vocational training. I think we need more of that for 15, 16, and 17 years olds who have decided that they want to fix airplanes for a living or become a machinist or a welder, to open up the Pell Grant program so they can use it to go to high school in the morning and then trade school in the afternoon, and they can graduate job ready.
Federal government can play an important role. You know, right now, for instance, we're behind in STEM education substantially, particularly from other developed countries. And it's a national problem. There are ways that, you know, we can have a national focus on getting our people caught up. There's no question about that.
So are you using the bully pulpit to sort of make that message heard?
Absolutely.
Because you're still relying on states to ultimately get this done.
I would use it, and I would also look at the states that are doing well. You know, it was intended that we would have all these laboratories in each one of the states, and we could learn from them, and we could, you know, see who is extremely successful, and then we can make that available in other places.
Common Core has been controversial within the Republican Party. Your mentor, Jeb Bush, who's been a real leader on education, I think, for years, has stayed with Common Core as the idea of a way to get all states to raise their standards. Where are you?
The Common Core is about curriculum reform, and I'm a supporter of curriculum reform.
But Common Core is about trying to set a benchmark that everyone could aim for.
But the benchmarks drive the curriculum. So in essence, if you say we want to become more proficient at this or that, then the curriculum would respond to it. My problem with that, of course, is that every time, if you create it as a national standard, the next step is going to be the federal government uses it as a mandate mechanism.
I think the less federal interference, the better. States will be able to set their own standards, work with their local school districts and with parents and PTAs. I don't see a downside in doing it that way. I see a big downside in imposing from above, you must do it this way, this is the standard that we have set. So far, it's created nothing but chaos.
So, Mark, the question before us is, you know, these two guys talking about education, this issue in a Republican nomination fight, salient, matters, or no?
I think it does. I think the Republican Party has been in retreat during the Obama years. They lost the battle in a lot of states over vouchers. President Obama has been, by some measures, a conservative education reformer. In some ways, it's the way he's been the most fighting a different kind of Democrat fighting his party. But there's still the controversy over Common Core. There's still the impression that's accurate that a lot of our kids, particularly poor kids, aren't given an equal chance. George Bush convinced Americans that he cared about education, would be a great on education. I think there's a huge opening here, particularly as Hillary Clinton takes some at least small steps towards the left to deal with the teachers' unions.
Right. I think if you get yourself in a position where in the general election, this is an issue where there is a lot of opportunity for Republicans to make arguments, because teachers' unions are so unpopular, even among a lot of Democrats. People don't really like teachers' unions, even though they like teachers. I'm most interested, though, in the fact that because Jeb Bush and John Kasich have not done better so far, the Common Core argument that I thought, and maybe you thought, was going to be a big issue in 2015 has not really been central because those guys have had too many other problems that people could have focused on rather than focusing on that.
And when I asked Paul Ryan in Milwaukee about vouchers and the voucher movement, he basically said vouchers are great, Milwaukee's done great with them, but it's not a federal issue. You see that here a little bit with these two guys. It's like you're running for president, but you basically want education reform not mandated by Washington, but down at the state and local level. It makes it harder to argue that you're going to be good on education as opposed to simply use the bully pulpit. Right. I think if Hillary Clinton's the nominee, the right Republican still, without violating federal principles, 10th Amendment, can make a pretty strong case on education.
Easier to contrast against her than it was against Barack Obama because he was not, in fact, a creature of the teachers' unions.
Right.
He was pro-charter school, et cetera. She looks a lot more like a creature of the teachers' unions and so therefore a riper target for the right Republican.
Statistics are mixed about how much improvement there's been on education, but it's still a big issue for a lot of Americans.
No doubt about it. All right, when we come back, Bush 41 biographer and our good friend John Meacham, after this word from our sponsors. John Meacham is the author of the instantly and justly celebrated George Herbert Walker Bush biography, Destiny and Power. He joins us now from Philadelphia. John, so good to see you.
Huntley and Brinkley, how are y'all?
Yeah, very well, sir. Thank you. So, John, we're going to do a thing as authors ourselves. This is the kind of question that we always wish someone would ask when we're in the midst of promoting a book, but never get asked. Okay, so here it is. What stories from this book that you consider important have you not had a chance to talk about yet?
I do appreciate that. One of the things that I find so fascinating is whoever was hiring the Andover faculty in the 1930s was brilliant, because if you read George Herbert Walker Bush's teacher reports, you find that he basically, the character of the man was almost entirely set from the time he was 14 until he was 18. He got overly intense about everything. He worked hard but didn't want anyone to know it. He worried a great deal but covered it up with a great amount of charm, an ability to reach out to his classmates. He was a heroic figure at the school, famously helped a kid who was being picked on. He said, "Knock it off," and the kid later said, "You know, who just saved me?" And they said, "Well, that's Poppy Bush. He's the best kid in the whole school." So basically, the entire character of the man was formed long before he entered public life.
John, you did something that's kind of unusual in a book like this, which is you went to some of the non-main characters besides President Bush 41 and told them what you had and kind of got their reaction, reporting within the book itself. But since the book came out, there have been additional reactions. Secretary Rumsfeld has reacted. Dick Cheney's reacted. Talk about sort of what things have occurred since the book came out, whether they surprised you or not, but they sort of have advanced the story beyond what you put within the hardcover pages.
Well, yeah, I did go to everybody. I think Cheney's been a great sport. I think he's been gentlemanly about it. He sort of embraced the iron ass comment that 41 made about him.
He's a proud iron ass.
And I think, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And if you think about it, I mean, actually, if you're Dick Cheney, given what Peter Baker reported in Days of Fire and what a lot of us have followed, it kind of puts Cheney back in the center of the conversation in a way that he had not been in the past couple of years. So I think that might be part of what's going on. On Rumsfeld, I think Rumsfeld sort of proved the point. He on the record, he declined to comment. We had two conversations about what President Bush had said about him. To me, he didn't want to comment on the record. Then his statement was that President Bush is getting up in years. But the problem is that Bush's comments about his being arrogant, iron ass, not being reflective enough, were comments made first in October 2008, and then repeated again over several different years. So in a way, I think that Rumsfeld's I guess it's passive-aggressive, maybe it's just aggressive,
Yeah.
reaction. It puts a capper on what has been one of the great rivalries in modern American politics, which is the Rumsfeld versus Bush.
Right, let's just unpack, though, this thing, which got a lot of attention in the beginning, which is Bush 41 basically says, from where I sat, Cheney and Rumsfeld had too much influence. They were too bellicose, and that influenced my son. Bush 43 says, you know, I love my dad. I don't really want to challenge my dad, but I called the shots. So did Bush 41 have enough data to make this judgment? Is this an informed judgment that he passed on to you, or was this just a father kind of imposing his view of Cheney and Rumsfeld on the events, trying to get his son off the hook a little bit?
I don't think he was trying to get it off his hook, and I don't think he had much more data than a lot of us had. I think one of the factors that hasn't gotten a lot of attention is I think that President Bush 41 reads the New York Times every day, and he follows the and honestly, and he follows the news. He followed the commentary, and particularly as things were so bad in Iraq in 06, 07, before the surge. And I think that it was an informed observation, given that he knew everyone. Right. But to me, one of the very interesting things is both 43 told me and 41 told me that they had never had this conversation. He had never said, you know what, I think Cheney is exacerbating
Why not?
The image.
Why wouldn't they have had that conversation?
Two things. I think two tributaries came together. One is that 41 was incredibly deferential to every president who ever held the office, starting with Lyndon Johnson. When he was a Republican congressman from Texas, he said, I'm never going to attack you personally. I don't know that Lyndon Johnson was that worried about whether he was going to be attacked personally. That's in Barbara's diary, that he went up to him and said that. Nixon, Ford, even Carter, because Bush left the door open to being kept on as CIA director to keep the job from being seen as one that shifted from administrations. And then famously, almost to the point of, as Gary Trudeau put it memorably in Doonesbury, almost putting his manhood in a blind trust by being so deferential to Reagan. So he was... 41's default position is you don't complicate the life of a president. Right. All right, so then you go to 43. And 43, you all know this, I defy anybody to spend 4 or 5, 6 minutes around George W. Bush and think that he wasn't totally in charge of whatever situation he wanted to be in charge of. And frankly, he believed he was getting the advice he needed to get. So he asked his father about personnel. He asked him about George Tenet. If you read decision points very carefully, there are a number of cases where he asked his father's counsel, including whether or not Jim Baker might come in 2005 and replace Rumsfeld, including the ultimate appointment of Bob Gates to that job in the fall of 2006. And I said to President Bush 43 in an interview that I had a theory that he protested too much about how little he asked his father for fear of appearing overly dependent on the previous generation. And 43 said, well, that's not a bad observation, which I took as a resounding yes.
Yeah, that's right.
I think they just don't, I really believe that they did not have long, serious conversations about policy or substance.
Let me ask you, John, about a moment in the book. We just talked to Vin Weber a little earlier on the show. You have a scene in the book where Vin Weber and Newt Gingrich go to visit George Herbert Walker Bush in the White House when they are kind of the ascendant force in what is the new face of the Republican Party. It's a small story, but it seems really kind of freighted with a lot of meaning to me as I read it. So talk about that story and what it meant to you, what you think it means.
I thought it was absolutely critical. Thank you for that. Thank you for raising that. I should have mentioned that one before. So you know the line about a wing of a butterfly starts a hurricane. So let's take one step back here, and this is the one forum where people would probably care. So John Tower fails to be confirmed as Secretary of Defense. Right. Bush 41 reaches out to Dick Cheney, pulls him out of the House leadership. He becomes Secretary of Defense, leaving the House Republican whip job open. Vin Weber of Minnesota runs the campaign within the caucus for his friend Newt Gingrich. Gingrich is elected, put in the House leadership. a series of events that ultimately leads, of course, to 1994 and Gingrich becoming Speaker. Interesting to think about what might have happened if Cheney had stayed in the House leadership.
Right.
So put that to one side. So Bush calls Gingrich when he's elected to the whipdom and invites not only Gingrich, but Vin Weber. And Weber said to me, what other president would even think about inviting your campaign manager? They have a beer upstairs in the residence with John Sununu, George Bush, Vin Weber, Newt Gingrich. And they can tell, Weber and Gingrich can tell that Bush wants to say something but can't quite get it out. And so as they're leaving, Congressman Weber says, Mr. President, tell us what worries you most about us. And Bush said, without hesitation, I worry that your idealism might sometimes get in the way of what I think of as sound governance. And Weber said he always credited Bush for using the word idealism. He didn't say ideology, he didn't say purity, he didn't say nuttiness, he didn't say inflexibility. And there's a direct line from that conversation to the 1990 budget deal. It's the third week of June 1990 when Bush puts out the press release. Remember, he doesn't announce it. He doesn't announce that he's breaking the one memorable phrase of his public life, read my lips, no new taxes, to that point. They stick the press release up on the bulletin board. And then for 3 long days, Bush never comes out and explains why he put the tax increases back on the table. Weber and Gingrich find out about it from reporters. And it instantly goes into Weber's mind instantly goes back to that moment that this is what he was talking about. That, in fact, Bush believed that sound governance ultimately would probably mean more taxes to bring the Democrats along, to get spending caps, pay-go rules. And I think in many ways that moment is the beginning of, or certainly a critical chapter in the politics we have now.
John Meacham, that is only one of the many amazing stories in your book. Thank you for coming on the show. The book, again, is called Destiny and Power. Check it out like everyone else. They can't keep them in the stores, we hear. But we'll be back to talk about some other stuff in 60 seconds.
Welcome back. It's shaping up to be another busy weekend out there in election land. So let's go live to our 72-hour campaign forecast center where our chief political meteorologist, Alexander Trowbridge, is standing by. Tro, looks like it's going to be a busy weekend.
Mark, that's not even debatable, especially if you'll be in Des Moines for the Democratic debate. As you can see, we're expecting some November flurries around the country, so let's start by flying on down to the Sunshine State, where a Republicans dozen, that means 12 candidates will be at the Sunshine Summit in Orlando on Friday and Saturday. If you're in the area, get out that PPF 50. That's painter protection factor, and lather up. Let's move on over to that Iowa spot now, where we got that powerful delta we've been telling you about. Clinton, Sanders, O'Malley, the second Democratic debate on Saturday night. Keep an eye on Clinton. She's also expected to hit a watch party at Drake. Love the Drake. That's it for me. And remember, like an umbrella or John Meacham on a Kennebunkport clam bake, we have got you covered.
Thank you, Tro. So let's talk about Florida first. You know, you got these candidates going to the state party thing. As much as we talk about the first 4 states, as much as people sort of say either Rubio or Bush will win it, the fact is neither Rubio or Bush may be in this thing.
Who knows?
Come Florida, or you can imagine
as of now, I believe Mr. Trump is leading all the Florida polls.
You can imagine a world where Trump goes into Florida with a head of steam, and Rubio's got to try to stop him in his home state. Could be incredible.
Could be an incredible thing. Obviously, it's a winner-take-all state, delegate rich. I mean, it's a big deal.
And retail politics is impossible.
Yes, it's the first of the first mega state where being on the air is really what matters. You're going to be out in Iowa, though. Are you going to go see Cornel West? That's the question I have. I know you're going to the debate, but Cornel?
There's a lot of stuff for me to see in Iowa. I'm headed out tonight, and it is going to be, the debate obviously is a huge deal. We've gotten kind of used to the Republican debates. We'll talk more about it tomorrow, but we've only had one Democratic debate, and as we've talked about, Bernie Sanders was not ready for that debate.
Yes.
He'll be more ready this time, but will he be ready enough? And the other thing is, of course, only three people on the stage.
I think that's going to benefit.
A lot of talk time.
It's going to benefit this debate enormously. It's going to benefit, I think, all three candidates, but certainly it's going to give Bernie Sanders a chance to do whatever it is he decides he wants to do. It's also going to help Martin O'Malley. I know we always forget about him. He's unlikely to be the Democratic nominee, but he's going to get a lot more time to make his case that he's had before.
And the same thing I said about Hillary Clinton before the first debate, which is she is going to have if she makes one big mistake or even one medium-sized mistake, it'll be the story of the debate. So, as always, the margin of error, the pressure, big for her. Okay? We'll be right back.
All right, so here's the thing. We're on the Tube twice a day at 5 and 8 p.m. Eastern. We live 24/7, live 24/7 on BloombergPolitics.com. When you visit that site, make sure you check out our campaign tracker for the latest 2016 updates, along with Sasha P. Eisenberg's great piece on a new way that Ted Cruz's campaign is identifying voters.
Also, Sahel Kapoor has a story about how Republican strategists are uneasy about the Rubio-Cruz immigration feud that we talked about earlier. Both those stories very key. Tomorrow, I'll be in Des Moines, Iowa. We're going to preview the second Democratic debate. Jennifer Jacobs will join us from the Des Moines Register. Until tomorrow from Des Moines, sayonara.